Trump wants Canada's water, not as a metaphor, not as a political phrase, and not as a negotiation trick. He wants it literally. He reportedly told Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that he wanted to reopen discussions about shared lakes and rivers between the two countries. He referred to Canadian rivers as a giant faucet that could fix California's water shortages. He even went as far as disinviting Canadian mayors from Great Lakes Day at the White House, hiding behind protocol as an excuse. And now Mark Carney has drawn a hard line. Water is not negotiable, not for sale, not subject to American demands. Canadian water belongs to Canada, full stop. Carney did not deliver that message quietly through a press office. He delivered it in Davos, in front of the world's most powerful political and economic leaders, while unveiling Canada's trillion-dollar plan to become an energy superpower. That plan includes massive investment in pipelines, electricity generation, transmission infrastructure, mining expansion, and AI development. And all of it depends on one resource: water from the Great Lakes. Water that Trump believes should serve American needs first. Today, we're breaking down why Trump is suddenly demanding Great Lakes water, what the $6 trillion Great Lakes economy truly depends on, how Canada controls its share of the basin, why that control is terrifying Washington, and why Carney's refusal is forcing the United States to confront a reality it has avoided for decades. Canada decides what happens to Canadian resources. But before we dive in, if you appreciate in-depth analysis like this, hit that like button and subscribe to stay informed on the stories that actually matter. The American West is running out of water. The Colorado River is collapsing. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are hitting historic lows. California, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico are facing restrictions that threaten agriculture, power generation, and long-term growth. This isn't theoretical. This is measurable. Over 40 million people depend on the Colorado River system, and it is failing. Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States, has dropped to around 35% capacity. The Hoover Dam, which provides electricity to over 1 million people, could lose generating capacity entirely if water levels fall another 30 feet. And they are still falling. Farmers in California's Central Valley are abandoning fields because there is not enough irrigation water. Cities are introducing permanent water use restrictions, and the Colorado River Compact, written in the 1920s, was based on assumptions that no longer reflect reality. The river does not carry enough water to meet the legal obligations already on paper. Trump's answer is not conservation, not desalination, not recycling infrastructure. His answer is to take Canada's water. Trump sees the solution sitting directly across the northern border. The Great Lakes. They contain roughly 21% of the world's surface freshwater and about 84% of North America's surface freshwater, a supply so massive it is measured in quadrillions of gallons, and Canada controls half of it. Trump reportedly brought up water access in calls with Trudeau. The New York Times reported it. He referenced the Columbia River, which runs through British Columbia, and described it as a large faucet, implying it could be redirected south to solve the Western drought crisis. He did not speak as if this required mutual agreement. He spoke as if Canada's resources were automatically available to the United States. And that logic matches every Trump-style threat directed at Canada. If America needs something, and Canada has it, then Canada should provide it. Canadian sovereignty is treated as a technical inconvenience, not a hard boundary. But water is not oil. Water is not timber. Water is not even critical minerals. Water is survival. It supports ecosystems, communities, food production, manufacturing, and electricity generation. Around 40 million people across Canada and the United States rely on Great Lakes water for drinking alone. Diverting it would not just shift trade balances. It would decide who gets to live comfortably and who doesn't. Canada has understood this reality for decades. That is why Great Lakes agreements have always been built on one principle: water stays in the basin. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin Water Resources Compact exists for exactly that reason. It blocks large-scale diversions and protects the basin from being drained to satisfy outside demand. 8 U.S. states signed it. 2 Canadian provinces signed it. The rule is simple: Great Lakes water stays in the Great Lakes system. Trump wants to erase that rule. He wants water flowing south to states that are not part of the basin, and he wants Canada to accept it as a trade concession, or as compensation for tariffs, dairy disputes, or whatever grievance Washington chooses next. Carney's answer is no, not negotiable, not open for discussion, no. To understand why this refusal matters, you have to understand what the Great Lakes economy actually is. This is not a symbolic partnership. This is a $6 trillion economic engine. If the Great Lakes region were its own country, it would be the 3rd largest economy on Earth, behind only the United States and China, and ahead of Germany, Japan, and India. The region includes 8 U.S. states and 2 Canadian provinces: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, alongside Ontario and Quebec. Together, they represent around 160 million people. In the United States alone, the Great Lakes region supports over 25 million jobs and generates more than $1.3 trillion in wages every year. This entire system depends on water, not as an environmental luxury, as a core industrial input: drinking water, power plant cooling, manufacturing processes, steel production, chemical processing, cargo navigation, food processing, and shipping. The Great Lakes move over 200 million tons of freight every year, and the Detroit-Windsor crossing alone sees about 10,000 trucks per day, carrying roughly $500 million in daily trade. Around 25% of all Canada-US trade crosses that corridor, more than the United States trades with France, Germany, South Korea, or the UK individually. And nearly 80% of what American companies import from Canada in this region is not consumer goods. It is intermediate goods, parts, components, raw materials, and industrial services used to produce other products inside the United States. The supply chain is integrated beyond separation. A car part might be cast in Ontario, machined in Michigan, assembled in Canada, then shipped back to the US for final production. And every step depends on predictable water access and stable cross-border cooperation. Here is the part Trump seems to underestimate. Canada controls half of the Great Lakes system. Not half the idea, not half the cooperation, half the lakes themselves. Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario are all shared waters. Canada controls the northern shorelines and Canadian law governs what happens there. Ontario alone has direct access to more Great Lakes shoreline than any single American state. Every drop of water on Canada's side falls under Canadian federal and provincial jurisdiction. The United States cannot simply take it. It cannot redirect it. It cannot seize it. It cannot demand it. Trump can threaten tariffs, threaten permits, and threaten political retaliation. But none of that changes the legal and geographic reality. Water on Canada's side is Canadian water, period. But jurisdiction is only half the story. The other half is infrastructure. Moving water at that scale is not simple. To divert Great Lakes water to the American Southwest would require massive canals, pipelines, pumping stations, and long-term engineering projects that would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. It would take decades, and it would require Canadian cooperation, because much of the water Trump wants originates on the Canadian side, and Canada is not cooperating. Carney made that unmistakably clear. Carney's message on water was not isolated. It fits into the same pattern Canada has been building since he took office. Trump threatens tariffs. Canada signs major trade expansion with China. Trump tries to block strategic infrastructure. Canada points out existing legal ownership agreements. Trump threatens aircraft decertification. Canada shifts defense partnerships toward Europe. Every time Trump threatens pressure, Canada responds the same way. Not with panic. With alternatives. Canada builds paths around American leverage, and water fits perfectly into that strategy. If Canada agreed to divert Great Lakes water even once, the precedent would become permanent. California would demand more. Arizona would demand more. Nevada would demand more. New Mexico would demand more. And once the pipeline exists, the demand would never end. Canada looked at that future and refused it. The compact stays in place. Water stays in the basin. Canadian water serves Canadian priorities. If American states need solutions, they can build desalination plants, expand water recycling, invest in conservation, and modernize their infrastructure. They cannot solve their crisis by draining Canada. Trump disinviting Canadian mayors from Great Lakes Day was not about protocol. It was a warning. It signaled that if Canada refuses to cooperate, the US will treat Canadian participation in Great Lakes governance as optional. But that approach is dangerous. For over a century, Great Lakes cooperation has been managed through shared institutions, including the International Joint Commission, created in 1909. The lakes do not recognize borders. Pollution control, invasive species monitoring, shipping safety, ice forecasts, water level management. All of it requires binational coordination. If the United States begins treating cooperation as leverage, Canada can do the same. Monitoring stations, algae bloom data, ice tracking, shipping forecasts, environmental enforcement. None of it functions properly without both sides. Trump's approach threatens the system itself, and if that system collapses, both countries lose. That is why Carney's trillion-dollar investment plan matters. It is not just an economic plan, it is a sovereignty plan. It includes new pipelines that send Canadian oil to Canadian ports instead of US refineries, electricity transmission lines that connect Canadian provinces rather than relying on American grids, mining infrastructure that processes minerals inside Canada instead of exporting raw resources to the United States. And water is central to all of it. AI data centers require massive water cooling systems. Carney plans to build them in Canada, using Canadian electricity and Canadian water. Mines for lithium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earths require water for processing. Canada has the deposits and Canada has the water. So Carney is investing in domestic processing, ensuring Canadian resources fuel Canadian industry first. This is the shift that alarms Washington. Not a ban, not a threat, not a confrontation. Just Canada building independence. Here is what makes Trump's demand so reckless. The Great Lakes economy is not purely American or purely Canadian. It is a shared engine, and it survives only because cooperation exists. Threatening that cooperation over water does not strengthen American leverage, it weakens it. Because Great Lakes states like Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and New York rely on Canadian coordination as much as Canada relies on theirs. The governors of those states signed the compact because they understood the risk. If water levels fall, their industries suffer. If Canada withdraws cooperation, their supply chains suffer. And if Washington tries to drain Great Lakes water to satisfy the Southwest, the Great Lakes states will be the first to revolt. They cannot afford it. Carney understands this. That is why his refusal is not a provocation. It is a strategic defense of the status quo. Canada is not threatening to cut the United States off. Canada is simply stating the rules will remain the rules. Water stays in the basin. Cooperation continues. But only if the United States respects Canadian sovereignty over Canadian resources. If Washington keeps escalating, Canada has another option. It can simply invest. It can build infrastructure that makes American pressure irrelevant. That is exactly what Carney is doing. Trump wanted leverage. He wanted Canada to treat its resources as bargaining chips. Instead, he triggered the opposite response. Canada is investing in independence, pipelines, mines, grids, AI, data centers, all of it fueled by Canadian resources and cooled by Canadian water. And once independence is built, it cannot be taken away. The Great Lakes will remain shared. The water will remain in the basin. Cooperation will continue. But it will continue on Canadian terms, not American demands. And that is the reality Washington struggles to accept, because it proves one thing clearly. Canada controls Canadian resources, and no amount of pressure from the United States will change that. Trump's water ambitions failed before they even began, not because Canada threatened retaliation, but because Canada is building around him $1 trillion in investment, a future designed to make American demands irrelevant. And that is what truly shocked Washington. Not confrontation, just independence.